In Mercer County, West Virginia, all that's left from a once thriving amusement park are the rusted remains of rides and the unsettling reminder of the dark curse that haunts the land where Lake Shawnee Amusement Park was built. In 1926, a man named Conley Trigg Snido purchased a farm where he would build Lake Shawnee Amusement Park. Conley was unaware that he was about to be the owner of the most cursed theme park ever built. The park itself was named after the Shawnee Native American tribe, which had resided on that land until the early 1700s. Throughout the process of building the theme park, workers unearthed skeletal remains, most of which belonged to children. Along with the bones, they uncovered ancient Native American artifacts. It became very clear that they were building on sacred land. It's estimated that nearly 3,000 bodies are buried on the site. The bodies that were exhumed were indicative of a disease that causes bone deterioration. In 1282, a terrible disease killed thousands of native children in the Shawnee tribe, and it turns out the location of the brand new amusement park in Mercer County was the site where those children had been laid to rest. But this is only the beginning of the tragedies that befell this land. When Conley purchased the land from the Clay family, he was completely unaware of the horrifying tragedies that had occurred on the Clay farm. In 1775, the Clay family settled on 800 acres of land on Bluestone Creek. Mitchell Clay and his wife Phoebe had 14 children. While researching the history of this place, the details just kept getting darker and darker. Mitchell Clay obtained the land from Lieutenant John Draper, but rather than purchasing the land, he gave him a slave woman and her children in exchange for the farm. On a somewhat more positive note, after the death of Mitchell Clay, in 1812, 37 years after the exchange, the slaves were able to gain their freedom through a lawsuit regarding the purchase of the land. 8 years after settling the land on Bluestone Creek, the Clay family had established a farm and a home. In August of 1783, Mitchell sent his 2 sons, Bartley and Ezekiel, to begin building a fence around a pasture for his cattle. Mitchell was out hunting while his boys worked in the freshly harvested wheat fields, and the oldest daughter, Tabitha, was down at the creek with her younger sisters washing clothes. A group of 11 Native Americans crept up to the edge of the field and shot Bartley Clay from the tree line. The girls heard the shot from the creek, and they ran towards the safety of the house, unaware that they were heading directly towards the spot where their brother's body lay dead. Tabitha looked on in horror as a native man attempted to scalp her brother, and she rushed to protect his body from the desecration. She reached for the man's knife, but he stabbed her to death before she was able to defend herself. The mother, Phoebe Clay, cried for help as she watched the men slice the scalps from her son and daughter. 16-year-old Ezekiel Clay was captured, and the men fled from the scene of the massacre. Phoebe placed the bodies of Tabitha and Bartley in 2 beds inside of the home. She gathered her remaining children and fled from the farm. Mitchell returned home a few hours later to see that his entire family was gone, and all that remained were the disfigured bodies of his eldest children carefully placed upon their beds. Vengeance was sought by the remaining members of the Clay family, and a party of men tracked down the group of Native Americans and slaughtered them. When Mitchell learned that Ezekiel was taken to Chillicothe, Ohio, he rushed to the village to rescue his son. Tragically, only moments before Mitchell's arrival, Ezekiel had been burned at the stake. Nearly 140 years later, the site of this horrific massacre would become Lake Shawnee Amusement Park. Conley Snido owned the park from 1926 to 1967, when the park was closed after a failed health inspection. During the 40 years that Snido owned it, 2 children drowned in the pond, and a 3-year-old girl died on the swing ride when a truck backed up into the path of one of the swings. The park was then abandoned for 20 years when a former employee of the park named Gaylord White decided to purchase and reopen it in 1985. Only 3 years later, the park was closed once again. Now, mysterious and unexplainable occurrences are said to be common around the abandoned park. The swings have been observed moving on their own. A young, pale girl in a white dress has been seen wandering through the park on several occasions. The sounds of children laughing fills the air, along with the disembodied cries of a young boy. From the desecration of a sacred burial site to the massacre of 3 young settlers, it's hard to imagine a worse place to build an amusement park. Is it possible that the murder of 3 children may have also been connected to the accidental deaths of 3 children nearly 200 years later? Regardless, a darkness lingers on the land where the dilapidated remains of Lake Shawnee Amusement Park continue to decay, and an evil presence is hidden in the shadows, waiting for the next victims of its ancient curse.